Good evening and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Sudana. I am one of the co-founders of eGMAT and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Sandeep. Sandeep is a GMAT strategy expert and he's going to be our co-host today. The topic of this webinar is how to score 760 on the GMAT. In this webinar, we talk about three things. One is if you're looking for a high score, whether it's 730, 740, or 760, or in fact even 680, how should you go about defining your study plan? That's the first piece. The second piece is we talk about, hey, once you have a study plan, once you have those milestones defined, we talk about how should you study such that you actually achieve those milestones. And then the third piece that we talk about is how do you put tracking metrics during that prep time so that if you're studying the right way, you can actually track your improvement. You can really say, I put in the next 40 hours and I know I've gone in from, let's say, a 580 to a 610. And then I put in the next 40 hours and I know that I've gone to a 640 and so on and so forth. And how can we be sure that you've actually achieved that improvement? This is a free webinar. It's quite heavily attended. And to make sure we cater to the needs of this particular group, we ask this one leading question, which is, when do you plan to take the test? Based on the data that I, that I have over here, what I can really see is that the two large groups, those who have between 46 and 75 days and those who haven't taken a data as of yet, it's about 65% of the entire class. And then we have a few folks who have their GMAT right away. We have then two equally sized groups in the 16 to 30 and a month to 45 days. Let's get to know about your target GMAT scores as well. So let's talk about your current GMAT scores. Let me reopen the poll. I'm going to remove broadcast results initially, and then your target GMAT scores. And what's nice about getting this data is, you get to really understand the makeup of this group overall. Okay, I just have 70 responses to the current GMAT poll question. I have actually a lot more responses to the target GMAT poll questions. I'd appreciate if you guys post responses to both the questions. That would definitely help me understand the makeup of this group. All right, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. With regards to current GMAT score, what we really see is that we have people in pretty much every segment. I think the starting from 400 to 500, which is about 10%, to about 710, 720. And then the biggest segment over here is those who probably haven't taken a mock test as of yet, who don't know their score as of now. With regards to the target GMAT score piece, excuse me, what I really see is that a good number of you are aiming for a 99 percentile, which is 760 or higher. We have 90% of you are aiming for a 710 or higher overall, which is an incredibly high percentage. Thank you very much for providing that information. Even though this is a strategy webinar, we do solve some questions. We're going to solve one question on boldface, and then if you're spending time, it's always good to learn concepts. So we do have a bunch of video lessons as a part of our free trial. If you've not gone through these video lessons, just log into your eGMAT account and you'd be able to learn some key concepts on both quant as well as verbal. And then we have some upcoming free webinars. We have an algebra webinar, which is tomorrow, in which we look at how to solve the most challenging questions on absolute value. We also have a free webinar on GMAT reading comprehension that is next week. Again, if you haven't registered, registered for these webinars, you can click on the register now button and register for the same. With that, let's go right into the webinar pane. What you will see is that the screen will be in the process of changing for you. As the screen changes, you would also notice that there's a Q&A pod below that. So if you have a question during this webinar, you can post that question in the Q&A pod, and Sandeep or I can take that question. That way, you would still get your questions responded to. That way, you still get those questions responded to while we finish the webinar on time. Okay. There's essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I give a brief introduction to eGMAT. In the second part, we get into the core of this webinar, where we look at how do you get to that 760 score. And in the third part, we keep some time in the end for an open-ended Q&A that allows us to answer any questions that we haven't responded to, either Sandeep or I, during this webinar. So with that, let's start the first part, which is an introduction to eGMAT. So as this question, what's your target GMAT score? And more than 90% of you were aiming for a score of 710 or higher. One statistic that would surprise some of you is that while 90% of you are aiming for a score of 710 or higher, I can tell you that only 6% of people get to score 720 or higher, and this is despite the fact that top B schools continue to demand higher and higher GMAT scores. You can look at the movement of median GMAT scores at top B schools. Now, what is it that people who get to those 720 scores do? A good percentage of them actually use eGMAT. Why do we say that? When you look at two stats, one is the number of verified reviews, and the second is the number of success stories posted over the last 12 months. What you're going to find is when you compare eGMAT to other prep companies out there, or the major prep companies out there, you're going to find that more reviews have been posted for eGMAT and more success stories that mention eGMAT have been written than do mention all of these other prep companies combined. Again, you can take a look at the URLs below. So what makes our students more successful? I think if there's one thing that makes our students more successful, that is our approach to overall GMAT preparation. And how is this approach different from the approach followed by other prep companies? If there's one thing that makes our approach different is the learning architecture that we follow. So when you think about the learning architectures that exist today, there are two predominant learning architectures that exist in the world today. One is what we call as a book-based approach, and the second is a private tutor-based approach. When you look at most of the other prep companies out there, whether they offer an online course or whether they're purely a classroom-based entity, what you're going to find is that the dominant architecture that they follow is a book-based architecture. When you look at eGMAT and compare eGMAT to these architectures, what you're going to find is that eGMAT is based around this private tutor-based architecture. So to understand why that is the case and why is one architecture more effective than the other, let's understand how do you ace the GMAT. So to ace the GMAT, you've got to do a few things right. First of all, you've got to create a path to your goal. Then you need to learn all the concepts that you're weak in. Now, learning concepts isn't enough. You need to learn how to apply those concepts as well. And then you need to attain that level of mastery so that you are among the top 6 percentile. So let's see how these approaches tackle these questions, starting with the study plan. So when you start studying using a book, a book-based approach is all about autonomy, which means when you start studying using a book, you don't get any personalized study plans. You may get a few study plans, but you as a student needs to decide which one's optimal for you. Then it comes to learning concepts. Now, the good number of books that teach a lot of concepts and provide really comprehensive learning environment, but that burden of validation with regards to whether you've learned concepts or not is completely on the student. The third thing is application of concepts. Now, one area where books falter the most is teaching application. just the very nature of books doesn't render them super effective to tell you what do you do in step one, what do you do in step two while solving a question, and tell you how you're faltering or where you're faltering. As a result, people who follow a book-based approach practice hundreds and hundreds of questions, and only the best and the brightest are able to master application. When it comes to evaluation of mastery, people who follow the book-based approach take tens of mock tests because that's the only way they can figure out how well they're scoring or how well they're likely to score. Again, when they take a mock test, the onus of analysis is completely on the student. Now, in a private tutor-based approach, the entire architecture is very different. When you work with a good private tutor, you get a private tutor works with you to create a personalized study plan. This study plan allocates enough time for your weakness and also makes sure that you leverage your strengths. Then a private tutor teaches you concepts, giving you feedback as necessary, making sure that he or she reinforces the areas that you're not as strong in. One area where the private tutor-based approach differs greatly from a book-based approach is teaching application. When you work with a private tutor will tell you how to approach problems of a particular type. What do you do in step one? What do you do in step two? And so on and so forth. And while teaching you, a private tutor constantly evaluates to really see whether you've learned enough to be amongst those top 6 percentile of students or not. And when you have, the private tutor makes you move to that next step. So how are these architectures different? While you learn the same content, one architecture is a lot more personalized than the other. The extent of application that you learn in the private tutor-based approach is a lot higher. And the kind of feedback that you get in a private tutor-based approach is essentially a lot more. Now let's see why is it that we say that eGMAT is based more around this private tutor-based approach. Let's take an example of a student who wants to go from a 600 to a 720 score. So one thing that you need to do, as we said, in terms of going from a starting score to ending score, is to define a path to that end score. When you join the eGMAT course, we ask you to choose that path. There are two distinct paths to getting to a 720 out of the 4 or 5 possible ones. One is what we call as a verbal driven study plan, and the second is a quant driven study plan. Depending on your strengths, we make you choose a study plan. Let's take an example of a student who's strong in quant and chooses the quant driven study plan because that is the most optimal study plan. So when you do that, what you're really saying is that your journey to 720 passes through you getting to a Q50 and a V38. Now then we make you decide how do you get to a Q50, and there are many ways to get to a Q50, and we make you choose the path that will help you or that is most optimal to get to a Q50. And let's say this student chooses a 93 percentile in arithmetic and a 79 percentile in algebra and geometry. So he chooses to excel in arithmetic and chooses to do above average in algebra geometry. Similarly, the student chooses to excel in sentence correction, do really well in critical reasoning, and then do slightly above average in reading comprehension. Now, even before you start studying, when you make these, you've got to understand the significance of this. Once you do that, your journey towards that 720 score is not just a black box in which you're studying. It's a set of 5 neatly defined milestones. You can be very certain if you hit these milestones, you will hit that 720 score. We build tools to help you get to these scores. This is a tool called eGMAT Planner that we built a couple of years ago, and you can see the same information that I showed on the prior screen displayed in the tool. This tool has a neural network running in the back end, which enables you to walk through all of these permutations and combinations and choose the scores which are relevant for you. So when you do that, your personalized GMAT preparation starts from ends up being, hey, starting from a certain starting score in sentence correction to getting to that 93 percentile. Similarly in critical reasoning and in reading comprehension. So you have neat trackable goals that you can evaluate yourself against every 15 days or 10 days or so, depending on the amount of hours you put in every day. The next thing that a private tutor does is teaches you concepts. And while teaching you concepts, a private tutor gives you feedback as you learn those concepts. Here is, so how do we do that? Here's a screenshot of the subject verb module in our sentence correction course. What you see over here on the left is a bunch of video lessons in which we teach you concepts. Now, we don't simply teach you concepts, we give you feedback every 20 to 30 minutes of your learning as to how well you're doing, how well you're learning those concepts. How do we give this feedback? Each video lesson has a built-in assessment engine that gives you this feedback. We built the core technology that allows us to provide this feedback. Now, how do other online courses approach this problem? When you look at some of the other online courses, and this is a popular online course by Magoosh, again, similar module, you see the subject verb module. What you really see is it's a bunch of lessons on subject verb. This timing that you see over here is a time that's the length of the video lesson. It's not how much time you spent on it. And again, there's absolutely no feedback. When you look at this structure, this seems a lot more like a book that has an audiovisual format and not an architecture around private tutoring. The third piece is application of concepts. Because remember, merely knowing the concepts isn't enough. You need to be able to solve questions by applying those concepts as well. At eGMAT, we built an entity specific to teaching you application. So we have this thing called, in every module, an application file. You can see in the subject verb module, the subject verb application file. This teaches you how to approach questions, telling you what do you do in step 1, what do you do in step 2, and so on and so forth. Once you do that, we evaluate you on that, and then we make you practice official questions as well. So you learn application, you get feedback on your ability to apply things, and then you also get feedback on your ability to apply the same concepts in official question. And this feedback is personalized to you. And this is how every module in the eGMAT course is structured, whether you're talking about a quant module or a verbal module. Now, again, let's compare the same thing with the Magoosh course, and what you would really see is that there is no application file. The emphasis on teaching application is just not there. You do see a quiz towards the end, but that quiz is common to not just subject verb, but also auxiliary verbs and pronouns. Again, the intent is not to give you feedback, but just to provide practice and hope that you're going to learn application by practicing. Now, why is this important? The reason why this is important is because you're not studying sentence correction for the love of sentence correction. You're studying sentence correction to hit 90 percentile. Now, after you go through the course, how do you figure out whether you've actually hit that 90 percentile without taking marks? At eGMAT, we built an assessment engine called Scholarium. It is actually the world's highest rated assessment engine. It's rated higher than GMAT prep mock tests. If you go and look at the reviews in Scholarium, we have this quizzes called ability quizzes. So after you're done with the sentence correction course, you take a sentence correction ability quiz, and it'll tell you what your ability is. Further on, it'll tell you why is it that you have not hit 90 percentile in sentence correction, and when it gives you this data, and when you do that, what you can really see is that it's very clear that this person needs to focus on comparisons. If he or she fixes their ability in comparison, they can be very certain that they're going to hit a very high percentile over here. So I think it's easy to see why, while both these approaches teach you the same content, the personalization, the extent of feedback makes the private tutor-based approach a lot more impactful. Excuse me. So someone asked this question earlier. They said, hey, you said 1800 reviews. You said only 60, 70 success stories. So are these 70 out of those 1800, or what's your success rate? We track our success rate by score improvement, and the average e-GMATer who takes a quant and verbal course improves by about 125 points on a scale of 800. Now, who's designed all of this content? Some of GMAT Club's top 5 instructors have designed this content. In fact, 4 out of GMAT Club's top 5 rated instructors work at eGMAT, and they work full time at eGMAT. You can actually read their reviews over there. These instructors also have been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. So you can know about their teaching styles. You can go read and see how they've helped students. With that, I have come to the end of my introduction. So you can really see while only 6% of the students get to that score, why a good number of them study with eGMAT. If you want to stay updated with all things eGMAT, I would recommend that that you connect with me on my LinkedIn. There are more than 10,000 students connected with me on my LinkedIn. With that, we've come to the end of the first part of this webinar. Let's get into the core of this webinar, which is how do you get to that 760 score? How do you build that study plan to get there? How do you learn the core skills that you need to learn to get to that score? So in this second part, we're going to divide this into 3 subparts. In the first subpart, we'll talk about your overall strategy, which is, hey, when you think of a certain score, how should you allocate time between quant and verbal? And what should be your target quant and target verbal scores? Then we'll look at core skills. Once you've defined you're going to get to a certain quant and a certain verbal score, we're going to look at how should you study such that you get to those scores, and why are these skills important, and how do you improve on them. And the third piece that we're going to look at is how do you track your improvement while you're studying. And this is probably the only part where we talk about the specifics of eGMAT course, and we look at various components that can help you track this improvement throughout your preparation. Okay, with that, let's start with the word strategy. And let me just put in an open-ended question over here. Yes, here is an open-ended question. Okay, we've talked about this word strategy quite a bit, and you guys know the word strategy. So when you think of the word strategy, what do you think it means, and why do we need one? All right, I have close to 40 responses. Let's see if we can get to 50. Three, two, and 1. Let me broadcast results. So I will give you a few more seconds to read through this. So as I read through the responses, I see 2 words that or 2 or 3 key terms that I see over here. One is essentially plan, which I see is probably the most common one. The second SE is organization, structure, are a couple of terms that I see over here. So essentially what this tells me overall is that you guys have a fair idea of what a strategy should be. When you look at the generic definition of what strategy is, it is a plan of action which is designed to achieve a particular goal. Now, if this is what strategy is, then let's look at what is a good strategy. A good strategy is something that provides maximum benefit with least input, and how it does it in general and principle is first by capitalizing on your strengths, and then second by overcoming the weakness that you have. Now let's kind of understand this term. This is actually really important, because if you understand this, many of you would be able to come up with a reasonably good study plan. Now let's talk about this word benefit over here. When you think about benefit in the context of GMAT, we're talking about score improvement, not the end score, but the difference between where you currently are and essentially where you want to be. Okay. Then let's look at the least input. Now, least input doesn't mean less input. If you're going from a 400 to a 700, you'd still need to put in 200 odd hours. But least input means when you compare it to all other paths, a good strategy would require less input than the other means to get to that score of 700. Now, how does it do it? The first thing that a good strategy does is it capitalizes on your strengths. If verbal is your strength, make sure you get to at least a 90 percentile on verbal. If quant is your strength, make sure you get to a Q50, which is close to a 90 percentile, or more precisely an 86 percentile, before you even start to spend time on your weakness. Why? Because that is the shortest path. That is the path that would require the least input. Now, there are certain hallmarks of a good strategy, and again, a lot of what I talk about in this session would be elaborating on these points. The first thing is a good strategy needs to be goal driven. I asked this question early on: what is your target GMAT score? And a good number of you, close to 30% of you, said it's 760. When you say it's 760, you have to be prepared to hit that 760 score. You have to be prepared to put in the effort that you need to put in to get to that 760 score. You have to be prepared to make sacrifices, because getting to that 760 score will require personal and professional sacrifices. The second piece, which is really important, is that a good strategy starts with a realistic situation, and that's something that's really important. Now, let me ask a yes/no poll question. How many of you, when you started studying for the GMAT, went to one of your friends and really said, hey, how long did it take for you to ace the GMAT, and assume that you're going to take a very similar amount of time? How many of you did that? Went to a friend or someone you knew who had aced the GMAT and took their study plan and really said, hey, a similar study plan might apply to me. Three, two. Let's get a few more responses, guys. I have 170 students, and I just have 87 responses to this question. How many of you went to a friend and pretty much kind of took their study plan and assumed it will apply to you? All right, let me just end the poll, broadcast the results. So 52% of you actually did that, and that's a fairly high number. Now, what are the problems with doing this? Now, first of all, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely wonderful to have a friend who's aced the GMAT. It's really useful, because you can bounce off a lot of things from that friend. The problem with taking their study plan without customizing it, or without putting in your own assumptions in it, is that, hey, when you go to your friend may have certain strengths that you may not have. Your friend may not have as stressful a personal or a professional life as you do. Your friend may live a lot closer to the office than you do. So as a result, your friend may be able to spend more time for studying. Your friend may need less time to actually go and ace the GMAT. And if you don't put all of those assumptions in, and you assume that, okay, if my friend was able to use the GMAT in a couple of months by doing this, I'm going to be able to do the same thing, then you create a study plan that's suboptimal. You create expectations for you, those expectations which essentially are you won't be able to fulfill, and it leads to stress. Has this happened with anyone? You've taken your friend's plan and realized, a few weeks down the line, oh God, this is way more difficult than what I thought it would be. The reason is you took the wrong plan. And then again, it wasn't a bad plan for him. It was probably a really good plan for him. But for you, it's a really bad plan. So that's something that is really important. Take that. Another big assumption that people fail to take in is their pace of improvement. There are people who learn things really fast. There are people who learn things slowly. And I'll take my own personal example. When I was in college, I had this friend who was a batch topper. Now, there's something very curious about this guy. This guy would not study during the semester. 20 days before the exam, he would just focus on learning things. I mean, he had this amazing ability to focus and consume information and spit it out. And so he would study for this 20 days in a 6-month semester and essentially top the entire batch. Now, had I tried to follow his strategy, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. The key thing which is there is, it doesn't matter how long it takes for you to study for the GMAT, as long as you have that time. What matters is that you ace the GMAT. So a lot of people, when studying for the GMAT, take their friend's plan and really try to compete with the length of time. It's a wrong battle to be in. Worry about learning, worry about having your own metrics towards that goal, not worry about chasing your friend's metrics, because in the end, what matters is that you ace the GMAT. It doesn't matter whether you took 2 months or 6 months, because in the end, it's the end score that you're going to have on your resume. Once you've taken all of this into account, where you've analyzed your current situation, where you have your strengths and weaknesses, then plan and execute. One of the things that you'll see us release over the next week is a tool. It's something that we've been working on for the last 5 months. It's called Personalized Study Plan. It's a tool that has 3 neural networks running in it. We put in close to 2,000 hours on that, where it'll allow each one of you to create your personal study calendar to the day. So yeah, we're very excited to release that tool. It's going to be released by the end of next week. So be on a lookout for that. Okay. Now, that was a brief introduction to study plan. Now, let's understand one key term called percentile. Let me ask this question. How many of you understand the term percentile? And again, it's the most important term on the GMAT. So I want to make sure that everyone has an absolute clear understanding of the term percentile. All right. Let me broadcast results. 91% of you claim to know percentile. And mathematically, maybe you know percentile, but I can tell you that less than 20% of you understand the implication of percentile with regards to the GMAT. So I want to make sure that I put in that implication over here. So what is percentile? Mathematically, it's nothing but your relative rank out of a population. So let's say about 250,000 people take the GMAT, and I've rounded that number to 250K. The real number is about 220K. When you get to a certain score, you get a certain percentile. So when you aim for a 760, you get 99 percentile. Okay. which means when you get a 760 out of you're better than 247,500 people, or you're amongst the top 2,500 people. When you get a 700, it's 88th percentile, which means that you're better than 220,000 people, or you're among the top 30,000 people who take the test. Now, why is it important that you understand this thing? For two reasons. One, because you can really see if you are among the top 2,500 or among the top 7,500, why you are a lot more attractive to B schools. When you look at the top 15 or 20 B schools, including international B schools, there are about 12,000 seats that they offer. So if you are among the top 7,000 students, you are a rare commodity. The second thing is, if you want to be among the top 7,000, top 2,000 students or so, you need to study in that manner. So every day when you're putting in that effort, you need to tell yourself that, hey, I am aiming for that 760 score, which means when I'm studying that sentence correction concept, I need to focus completely to master this concept, because unless and until you do, you're not going to be among that top 1 percentile. You're not going to be among that top 3 or 4 percentile. Because when you're studying, distractions will happen. And it's that motivation that will help you get past those distractions. Telling yourself that you are aiming for that percentile. Because simply putting the hours won't get you there. Putting in focused hours will definitely help you get there. Now, there's another term that people track a lot, which is when they take a quiz, they look at accuracy of questions, which is, hey, if I took a quiz, I got 8 out of, if I took a 10 question quiz, I got 8 out of them correctly, so my accuracy is 80%. Good number, but essentially that accuracy doesn't tell me anything about my percentile. Your accuracy may be 80%, your percentile may be 50. On a different quiz, your accuracy may be 80%, your percentile may be 95. And essentially, because when you take the difficulty level of questions in context, 80% could mean 50 percentile or 95 percentile. And you're going to really see this through a real example very soon. There's another term that I want you to worry about, which is ability. What is ability? Ability is I would say, in most cases, another term for percentile. What is it when put in a context in a certain section? It's your percentile. In the introduction part of the webinar, we talked about you aiming for 93 percentile. That's 93 percentile ability, more or less. Okay, I have a question. How do you determine how many people take the test when you have different number of people taking the test every year? That's a great question. So on the GMAT, when they calculate percentiles, they take a moving average of the last 3 years, and essentially, so they calculate this percentiles every 6 months. So that's how they are calculated. Because remember, you go into when you apply to B schools, you go into an application season which is about 6 to 8 months long. So that's how they cycle those percentiles. One thing that I want you to make sure is, when it comes to measuring your proficiency on the GMAT, don't worry about accuracy, worry about percentile or ability. That is your true measure. So before you start preparing, one thing that you really have to be very certain of is, what quant, what verbal scores are you aiming for? So as I mentioned, we build this tool that will help you get there. But just for our discussion, I'm going to really divide this entire group into 3 different subgroups and tell you what are the scores that you guys should aim for. Now, let me just ask this other question. Just give me 1 second, guys. Question really is, what is your strength? Is it quant, is it verbal, or is it neither? So neither quant nor verbal. Or you could say both would also go in neither. Okay, let's get a few more poll responses. All right, based on the data that we have over here, 60% of you, or close to 61% of you, believe quant's your strength. Close to 16% of you believe verbal your strength, and 23% of you believe neither. Your strength is neither quant nor verbal. Let me end this poll. So, since a good chunk of the class either believes that quant's their strength or neither is their strength, I'm going to really address these two groups. So if you're someone who is very strong in quant, and within quant I divide people into two subgroups, what I recommend is, if you are one of those quant verses and if you want to get to a 700, that you get to either a Q50 or a Q51, which means that to get to that 700 score, your target verbal percentile, you only need to get to that 66 to 69 percentile, which means a 30 to 33. Okay. Now, if you are someone in this group, even before you start studying for verbal, make sure you get to a Q49. If you're someone who's strong in quant, which means then you should, but you're not a quant whiz, then I would recommend aiming for at least a Q48, Q49. Accordingly, you need to get to a slightly higher score on verbal. If you are someone who is not strong in quant, consider verbal to be your strength. Why? Because if you think about which section is easier to ace between quant and verbal, if neither is your strength, or if then verbal is an easier section to ace. Because when you look at the syllabus for verbal is a lot more confined than the syllabus for quant. Now, if quant is your strength, you already know a good chunk of the syllabus. That's why I don't recommend that to you. But if neither is your strength, make verbal your strength. Okay. Make sure you get to a score between 40 to 43, and accordingly, your required quant score will be lower. But the leverage, the key part the key principle that we're following over here is that we always capitalize on our strengths first before we start to spend time on our weakness. Why? Because when we do that, A, we take the shortest path to our goal, and B, we are a lot more confident about our improvement. Why? Because if you're aiming for a 700, you cover quant, and you take a mock test even before you start studying for verbal. If you do happen to take a mock test, you'd be very certain that many of you would be at a 630, 640, and it'll take you, not more than 2 to 3 weeks to get to that score. So 3 weeks into your preparation, if you're already at a 630, you can be a lot more certain that if you have a month and a half or so, that you can get to that 700 score. Now, we have many people over here who belong to different segments, and we build this tool called GMAT Planner, which allows you to get to your target score. And so definitely try this tool out. It's called, you can look at the URL over there, gmatplanner.e-gmat.com. You can try this tool, get your own personalized quant and verbal scores. And the beauty of this tool really is that it has a neural network in the back end, so it gives you a great initial recommendation for your quant and verbal scores. But beyond that, you can customize those scores as well to your needs. Now, early on, I got a question which said, hey, how important is a good GMAT score for a B school application? And I'm going to show some data to prove the importance overall. I'd start with this one article, and a good chunk of you really said quant is your strength. This article is from 2014, and the importance of this article in today's context has only increased over time. This article is called On B-School Test, Americans Fail to Measure Up. This is an article written in Wall Street Journal. So it's a very credible article. Essentially, the crux of this article was that because of high GMAT scores from Asian countries, more specifically China and India, what B schools or admission officers at B schools are now asking for is for separate rankings for US students. And because of this, there are some very interesting implications for Asians. Okay. Here's an excerpt from this article. It says, to address those concerns, what are the concerns? Americans don't seem to be scoring as high as they were earlier. GMAT is the authority that conducts the GMAT. In September, and this is September of 2014, introduced a benchmarking tool that allows admission officers to compare applicants against their own cohort. And what do they do when they compare applicants against their own cohort? They're able to filter scores and percentile rankings by world, region, country, and college GPA. Okay. Now, here's an example of the kind of questions that B schools are asking. Sarah Nair, who's the Assistant Dean of MBA Admission at Darden, she said she was among those who contacted GMAT for help. And what did she say? She said, I need to be able to show my scholarship committee, which includes faculty, that this person is in the top 5 percentile of test takers in his region, even though that individual might not rank highly against test takers worldwide. There are a few implications from this. A lot of people think that, hey, as long as I have a great profile, I can have an okay GMAT, and that's fine. And you're gonna see some anecdotal cases where things may pan out that way, but as a rule, that is not true. GMAT is really important, even at top B schools. The other thing, a lot of people also think I'm strong in quant and I'm going to do slightly above average in verbal, and that way I'm going to get to a decent score. And because my percentile overall would be decent. Now, the way B schools operate today is they compare you against others from your region. And essentially, when they do that, you may be in the top 5 percentile worldwide, but when compared to a Chinese, if you are from that background, or an Indian, you may only be in the top 12 or top 13 percentile, which means that you need to do well in both quant and verbal to be in the top 5 percentile from your region. The third thing, when it comes to scholarships, your GMAT score plays a huge role. Schools openly say about that right now. In fact, some schools will actually tell you, if you talk to the admission officers, they will tell you if you don't have a certain GMAT score, don't even apply. And they will even tell you if you get to that certain GMAT score, you have a high chance of admission. I know at least 3 top schools that tell people this thing based on my interaction with students. Another thing that where data tells us is the chances of admission to a top B school by GMAT score, and this data was computed by administrators on GMAT Club, so moderators over there, and this was based on 3,000 submissions by 3,000 students. What they found out was that the probability of getting admitted to schools varied tremendously based on the GMAT scores. In some cases, the probability went as high as 50% when you got to a score of 760. We are also members of this this organization called eGAC. We are actually the platinum sponsors. What is eGAC? eGAC is an association of graduate admissions counselors, and what we do is that even though we are not an admission counselor, we belong to the association, and every year in May or June of that particular year, we go to a set of business schools and visit them, and admission officers from all top business schools come over there. We talk about trends in admissions. We talk about what is it that B schools are looking for. We talk about new programs that B schools introduce. And essentially, it gives us insights as to what B schools are looking for, and it allows us to give B schools feedback on, hey, if they've made a change in their application process, how did students feel about them? So it's a two-way street. It's a week-long conference which is a fairly open exchange with admission officers. So last year, in 2018, We were hosted by Kellogg and Booth, as well as Ross. The year before that, we were hosted by Stanford and UCLA Anderson and Booth. Before that, we were hosted by Harvard and MIT. So it's at different locations, and before that, it was hosted by LBS and INSEAD. So here are some updates. So some people worry about multiple attempts. Most schools are okay with that. In fact, a good number of schools um, really say that they see this as a positive character trait. If you've had a 630 and you improve that to a 730, it says that it shows that you want to study at a top B school. You're not you're not deterred by setbacks, and you can come back strong. In fact, schools even went on to really say that if you've applied to a certain B school, you haven't heard from us, and if you've improved on that GMAT score, let us know. If you're waitlisted and your GMAT score is lower than the median score, definitely improve on it. One admission director from top business school went on to really say that, hey, GMAT's the only thing you can change in a short time span. Why would you not do it? If you want to go to Columbia, if you want to go to Stern, if you want to go to GSB Chicago, if you want to go to Harvard or Stanford, make sure that you have at least a Q46. If you don't, they will worry about your ability to take on the coursework. Some B schools, as I mentioned earlier, would not even look at your GMAT score. Would not even look at your application if you don't have a certain GMAT score. They use your GMAT score as a filter. And when we asked them why that is the case, they said, because we know we're going to get that many applications from this pool. So we don't need to worry about looking at the application to determine how valuable this candidate is. We first look at the GMAT score and then look at the applications. Again, certain schools, not all schools. And schools confirm that when it comes to the GMAT scores and scholarship, they have a huge bearing on scholarships. In fact, we asked schools in a panel, what does scholarship depend on? And two factors came up. One is your GMAT score. The second is how much they like you during the interview. And by the way, USB schools give out more than $300 million in scholarships. So if you plan to come to the US, you should aim to get a scholarship. Here are some of the typical participants that you rarely see in these discussions. Manvi says, does it affect if the GMAT is taken more than 3 times? Manvi, you're going to see some data around that as well. Good question though. So till now, what I've talked about is statistical data. Now I'm going to show you anecdotal data, which means real use cases. Here's an example of a student who is, his name is Victor Makula. If I remember correctly, from Tanzania. He took the GMAT, I believe 3 times or 4 times. And the beauty of this is this guy got a 770. He received a full fellowship from Ross and Keenan Flagler, as well as an admit from Wharton. By the way, this is me over here for those of you who don't know me, and this is the student. This is a full unedited 30-minute interview that you guys can watch, and you can see how he went about his preparation. He improved his verbal score from V31 to V44. Now V44 is 98 percentile on verbal. For someone who's from Africa, for whom English is not their first language, that's an incredibly amazing score. He spent $600 on his GMAT preparation and received more than 200,000. Actually, GMAT and MBA application, and received $200,000 worth of fellowships. How did he get to that 98 percentile? He used data. He had a plan to get there, and he executed it step by step. I mean, full fellowship by Ross and Keenan Flagler is a very, very rare thing. Here's another use case. This guy got a 760, and when you watch his interview, which is at the URL over here, and I'll share this PDF with you, what you're going to really see is he has imperfect English, but he had a very solid plan. And because of his plan and because of how well he executed on this plan, he got not 1 but 4 full fellowships. He's currently studying at Ohio Fisher. He gets paid $1,700 a month to study there. About that, guys. Yes, so I had to mute myself. So I mean, imagine getting paid that amount of money. He, again, as I said, he got 4 full fellowships. And another thing that is there is a lot of people think extracurricular is really important and all of that. He's a simple guy who did his job well, studied well for the GMAT, and prepared really well for his interview. When you watch his interview and watch his debriefing session, you're going to really see by keeping things simple, by staying focused, it's fairly easy to get to that score and fairly easy to get scholarships. Again, imperfect English. Here's another example of a businesswoman, Pravi. Pravi attempted the GMAT 5 times. So her target score was 680. The last time when she attempted, she prepared with us and she realized she could do much better. And then she improved to 740. And she also got an $80,000 fellowship or scholarship from Georgetown. Her dream schools were Kellogg and Wharton. She's currently studying at Kellogg overall. So again, even though she didn't aim for it, she was able to improve to that score. Why? Because she was diligent. Despite running her own business, she was able to get there. For those of you who think you're really busy, here's another motivation overall. And this last story is of a student who's gotten into pretty much every top school she applied to. Mansi scored 770 and she was admitted to Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, and INSEAD. Here's a quote from her. It says, "I firmly believe that you should have your own customized strategy as per your needs. Once you learn from other strategy, while you can learn from other strategy, you should make it your own. And throughout this entire course of preparation, be flexible enough to adapt the strategy." When you watch a debrief, what you're going to really see is her strategy, which is along the lines of the principles that are taught in this webinar. You'll see neatly defined milestones. Excuse me. And you'll also see how she's adapted her strategy in the later parts of this webinar. She also worked with her partner, Maya Review, and when it came to her essays and the entire application process. And she interviewed with me, she interviewed with Poonam at Maya Review, and Poonam allowed us to publish this interview for your benefit as well. So you can learn not just about her GMAT preparation, but also about her application. So, what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? The first thing which is there is admission to the school, admit to the school of your choice. If you're aiming for a Darden, if you're aiming for a Kellogg, if you're aiming for a Stanford, you get there. You think about the financial impact over 10 years, it's easily $500,000. The second thing is scholarship. An amazing GMAT score can land you that scholarship right then and there. And that is an immediate impact of 120K. Another thing which is there is, if you have a scholarship, you can be very certain that your visa to study in Europe or the USA will not be rejected. For those of you who want to work in corporate strategy, corporate finance, or consulting, most likely the person interviewing you will have an amazing GMAT score. And if your GMAT score is close to their score and they see that on your resume, even before you walk in that interview room, you will have that sense of respect. And for those of you who need a backup career, being a GMAT instructor is a fairly lucrative career. So, very high ROI. It gives you confidence, and essentially, even though that score is valid just for 5 years, it stays with you forever. I still write my GMAT score on my resume, or rather, if I put my resume out there someday, I'd still write it. Why? Because even though the score is not valid, I scored it once. So hopefully that gave you some context with regards to how many times should you take the GMAT, what is the value of GMAT score, how do schools look at GMAT scores and do that. There was another question where someone asked, what's the value of essays and experience on your application? So if you look at pure weights, and if you look at what the GMAT really says, your GMAT score is about 23% of the entire application. But if you think about the portion of your application that you have control over, why? Because your experience is what your experience is. Uh, your interview is going to be based on your experience as well. So if you look at what is the aspects of your application that are under your control, the GMAT score is contributes to about 70% of those aspects. So with that, let's understand how you would ace the GMAT. Okay, and we're going to delve a bit more deeply into these two terms, accuracy versus ability. Again, remember, accuracy is when you take a quiz, it's the percentage of questions that you answer correctly. Ability is your comparative performance in a particular section. So for those of you who really said, hey, I've been studying, but my score doesn't seem to improve, or how do I ensure that I study in the right manner? This is going to lay the foundation. Now, we've been in this webinar for an hour, so let's take a 2-minute bio break. It'll allow you to get a drink of water, use the restroom if you need. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. All right, so let's take a 2-minute bio break. I'm going to mute myself and we'll be back. All right, guys, let's resume. Okay, to understand how you ace the GMAT, one thing that's really important is to understand how an adaptive test works. So what we're going to do is we're going to simulate the GMAT attempts for two different students. On the x-axis, what you see over here is question number, and on the y-axis, what you see is a difficulty level of questions. The higher you go on y-axis, the more difficult a question becomes. So we'll simulate student 1 and student 2. Student 2 is on the top in blue. Student 1 is on the top in blue, and student 2 is at the bottom. So let's take case 1 of student 1. Student 1 gets the first question. Now the first question is always around the median difficulty level. So he gets that right. Because he got that right, the second question that he got was of a higher difficulty level. He gets that right as well. The third question that he got was an even higher difficulty level. He gets that wrong. The fourth question that he received was at a difficulty level between question 3 and question 2. How do you get that? If you draw horizontal parallel lines from here, and this is not exactly straight, but let's try and make this straight a bit. but yeah, I can't make it. Well, I can. Yeah, not really. So if you draw horizontal lines between question 2 and question 3, what you're going to find is question 4 is between those horizontal lines. So question 4, slightly lower difficulty level. He gets that right. Question 5, again, slightly higher difficulty level. He gets that wrong. Now, student 2, again, starts with a medium difficulty level, the first question. So gets the first question wrong. Student gets the second question, which is of a lower difficulty level, gets that right. Gets the third question, which is again of a slightly higher difficulty level, gets that wrong. Gets the fourth question, lower difficulty level, gets that right. And gets the fifth question right as well. Now, at the end of question 5, if I were to end the test, who do you think would be doing better? Is it student 1 or student 2? Student 1 will definitely be doing better. Now, that is great. Why is it that student 1 would be doing better? What causes him to get a higher score? What causes student 1 to get a higher score? Okay. Let's get a few more responses. All right, I'll broadcast results. I have two category of responses. One group of people says because he got the first few questions right. The second group of people says because he got the difficult questions right. For those of you who mentioned the difficult questions, you guys have the right reason. The reason why student 1 has a higher score if we end the exam at question number 5 is because he answered more difficult questions correctly. Now let me ask another question. Did student 2 even get an opportunity to answer difficult questions? Was he served difficult questions? Look at the data over here. No, he wasn't. Why? When you think about it, if you draw a horizontal line over here, which is the average difficulty level, in the first 5 questions, every question that he was served was either at the average difficulty level and or below. In fact, the first question was the only question which was at the average difficulty level, which is this question over here. Okay, and this is something which I really want you to understand, that on the GMAT there's something called the question picker, which decides which question to serve to you, and essentially if you are unable to answer medium difficulty level questions, it will serve easier questions to you. Okay, that's how the question picker decides which questions to serve. Now, why does it do that? Why does the question picker serves easier questions to you? Why does it serve easier questions to you? Okay, because it adapts to your level. Okay, so a lot of these answers, while factually correct, they don't show the real reason. So on the GMAT, what the GMAT's trying to do is evaluate your ability. Now, how can the GMAT evaluate your ability? It can only evaluate your ability based on the questions that you answered correctly. Okay, and so to do that, the question picker, which is the core part of the exam, always has an estimate of your ability, and it's trying to serve the questions to you according to your ability. So when you make mistakes in medium difficulty questions, it serves easier questions to you so that you get them right, because it can only evaluate you on questions that you answer correctly. Okay, so in some ways what this question picking engine is trying to do is to reach what we call in mathematics as a local maxima of your accuracy. Because it's trying to improve on your accuracy. Think about it. If you get medium questions wrong, it serves you easier questions. Why? So that you get questions right. Based on those correct questions, it can help evaluate your ability. Does that make sense as to how the question picker works? And you can really see how it's working over here. So what this question picker, by doing this, what this question picker is trying to do is it gets you to that local maxima of accuracy. And because it gets you to that local maxima of accuracy, measuring accuracy on the GMAT can be a fairly useless exercise. I'm going to show some data to prove the same thing, but does it make sense to you? That because the question picker is trying to maximize your accuracy, if you purely focus on measuring accuracy, it will lead you to incorrect inferences. Okay. So in principle, you understand this. Let me show this to you happen in practice. Okay. Now, these are screenshots of the verbal section, which is the verbal section in how it used to be in 2017, when you had 41 questions. Now, what you see over here is attempts on 41 questions. This is GMAT prep data, and the red squares, the red rectangles that you see over here are the rectangles where the students made mistake. Now, if you look at them closely, and I want you to actually spend some time looking at them, what you're going to find is between question numbers 11 and question numbers 41, these students are virtually indistinguishable. So they're virtually similar. The only difference really is in question numbers 1 and 2 over here, where this guy made a mistake, whereas student 1 did not make a mistake. Their scores, even though the difference in accuracy is just 2 points, were drastically different. Student 1 got a V43, which is 97 percentile. Student 2 got a V32, which is 65 percentile. If you look at this, and from a lens of accuracy, what you would really say is, oh my God, I make 2 more mistakes and I put in 80,000 students between me and the next guy. This seems really harsh. How many of you are thinking that way? How many of you are thinking that this is really, really harsh or brutal, as one of you said? I'm going to broadcast results. Okay, this happened with some of you. Actually, this is not harsh. Here's the funny thing that happens when I show this, right? A lot of people think, oh my God, the V32 guy made 2 mistakes and he got a V32, but no one really thinks that you can make 9 mistakes and still get a 97 percentile. How many of you thought that? Oh my God, I can make 9 mistakes and still get a 97 percentile. How many tests do you really see where you can do that? Okay. Now, again, when purely viewed from a lens of accuracy, this may seem super harsh, but when you view it from a lens of ability, which is what we're going to view in a few slides, and when you simulate this on how the GMAT actually works, this would make complete sense to you. So let's simulate this. Let's go back a couple of slides. Okay. So here's student 1 over here. Student 2, we're going to look at the guy who made 2 mistakes in the first 2 questions. He got the first question, which is of a medium difficulty level. He got that wrong. He got the second question, which is a 30 percentile question. He got that wrong as well. So the question picking engine, which we just talked about, is not, you can't fault the question picking engine to really think that this guy is not a very smart guy. Why? Because he got a 50 percentile question wrong and then a 30 percentile question wrong, one after the other. So if as a human you were judging this guy, you would come to the same conclusion that this person is not a very smart person, Would you agree? At the point in question number 3, that's what you would really say. So the question picking engine started to give him really easy questions. So the third question was a 15 percentile question. He got that right. The fourth question was a 20 percentile. The fifth was a 25 percentile. The sixth was a 40 percentile. The seventh was a 55 percentile, and so on and so forth. Okay. By the time he reached 8th or 9th question, he started getting 700 level questions, which is when he started making mistakes again. Student 1, on the other hand, got the first 4 right, and he started getting difficult questions right then and there after that. Okay, so the difficulty level of questions served to these guys were very, very different. Now, for those of you who practice in our Scholarium platform, you guys know that a difficult question gives you 3 times as many points as an easy question does. Okay, so when it came to their end scores, what the GMAT did was it actually measured their ability and created their end scores based on them. We're going to look at what their abilities were. Okay, but essentially both of these were eGMAT students. Student 1 on the actual GMAT ended up getting a V44. Student 2 on the actual GMAT ended up getting a V35. Both of them, their GMAT prep scores as well as their actual GMAT scores are very close to their actual abilities. Now this was GMAT prep data. Here is a data which all of you can really download. Another student who improved from a V17 to a V40. Now he scored a 710 with a V40, and what you can really see is when he scored a V40, you can look at his ability score, and you can look at his scores in subsections, which is SC, CR, and RC ability scores. Now the reason why I have this over here is because you can really see this guy made about 12 mistakes and was still able to get these scores. Here is his report for his test progression. What you see over here is that this guy was able to made a lot of mistakes in the third and fourth set of questions that was served to him. But because he did really well in the first 2 sets, which is, let me just put in over here and over here, he was able to prove to the question picking engine that he can solve difficult questions. And he was served very difficult questions over here and here. But because he was able to prove his ability to the test, despite making these many mistakes, he was able to get to a V40. Now, why do I have this example? How many of you, when you are studying, worry about timing? Say, I've got to answer questions as quickly as possible. How many of you worry about this thing? Let's get to a few more responses. How many of you worry about timing? I have 160 students in the webinar. Let's get at least 100 responses. Based on the data that I have over here, 90+% of you, or around about 90% of you, worry about timing. Now, when you think about this over here, if you can prove to the GMAT that you have the ability to answer difficult questions correctly, you can get half the questions wrong in the third and fourth block over here and still get a 90 percentile. Does timing matter as much when you look at this? One of the things which you're going to see a lot of GMAT experts tell you is that GMAT means solving questions correctly. That's what acing the GMAT is. It actually isn't. Acing the GMAT is proving to the test that you have the ability. If you can prove to the test, you can make many mistakes and still get a very high score. I mean, this guy could have just randomly marked half the questions in these blocks over here and essentially gotten over any timing woes that he had, as long as he proves to the test that he has the ability to solve difficult questions. And Avika, yes, Avika is a long time student. She says she got an entire RC long and she still got a V40. Yes, there is the example. So we call this strategy a build, maintain strategy where you're building your ability or you're proving to your ability, proving your ability to the test in the first two blocks, and then you're maintaining your ability after that. Do you remember these guys? We just saw that. Do you remember these guys? Right? When we looked at them from a lens of accuracy, we saw that there was very little difference between these two guys. And I said, that's not how the GMAT looks at it. This is how the GMAT looks at these guys. The V43 guy had a 95 percentile ability in SC, 95 percentile in CR, and 87 percentile in RC. And the V32 guy had very different abilities. When you look at them through the lens of ability, do these guys seem very different? When you look at them through that lens of ability, do they look different? And that's the lens that GMAT looks at them with. It doesn't look at them through the lens of accuracy, but through the lens of ability. And that's where proving yourself, proving to the test is really, really important. Okay, Jatin says, what do the first and second blocks represent? Great question, Jatin. So he's talking about these blocks over here. So essentially, when the GMAX, so remember I talked about the question picker. When the GMAX gives you a question, it gives you questions in blocks of difficulty level. So it doesn't really drastically change the difficulty level at a question level. It changes the difficulty level at a block level. So in block 1, for example, is the median difficulty block. You'll get questions around the median difficulty level, so with the standard deviation around them. And that's the first block. Based on how you perform, at the end of the first block, which is over here, the test then makes a decision as to, hey, which difficulty level to serve, and then accordingly serves the question, then makes another decision over here, then makes another decision over here. For those of you who are mathematically inclined or who are into designing algorithms, this is what we call as using the item response theory, and within the theory it uses the maximum likelihood algorithm. Again, you don't need to know what it is. You can't game the system by knowing what it is. But for those of you who are curious, so Fusen says, isn't this supporting the general myth of getting the first few questions correct? First of all, it's not a myth regardless of what the GMAT says. In fact, the retired statistician has said that it is not a myth. The guy who used to run the GMAT and was retired 5 years ago. And it has been proven it is not a myth. Remember, when you read what the GMAT really says, they word their terms very carefully. What they say is, every question in the first 10 questions is no more important than the same question served elsewhere. What they're really saying is, if you get a question on sentence correction in the first 10 questions, and it's defined as a difficulty level of medium hard, then the same question when served as question number 31st would still be a medium hard question, which is true. What they're really saying is, the difficulty level of a question doesn't change based on its position. What they won't really say is that when it comes to the question picking engine, it forms a certain bias about you, and that bias is difficult to be overcome when in the later part of the GMAT. And in fact, what you'll really see is I have close to 500 ESRs with me, and I can show you if you make mistakes early on, it's very difficult to reverse that question picking engine to really say, even though you may perform really well later in the test, it's very difficult to get a very high score. So the key thing that I want you to take away is that when it comes to acing the GMAT, it's all about building ability. That's the primary thing. That's 80% of your of what matters when it comes to acing the GMAT. The other piece, which is, hey, timing, exam strategy, stamina, they're important, but not as important. Okay. Ole says, so would you say that rather than focusing on questions, solving lots of questions right throughout the exam, it's rather important to answer hard questions that you can get by solving the first questions right? Also, would that imply that focusing on the first question to get them right in terms of time spending is worth the risk of running out of time towards the end? So, Ole, good inference, I would say, and to a certain degree, I agree with you. But there's a very big assumption when you made that statement. So what Ola is really saying is, hey, do you think I should spend more time early on to make sure that I get the first few questions right? And essentially, Ola is and rather than and it's okay to spend less time towards the end. Is that what you're saying, Ole? Okay, perfect. Yes, good. Now, there's a huge assumption, and a lot of people think that, but there's a huge assumption when you make that statement. The assumption really is that your probability of answering a question increases with the amount of time spent on that question, right? That's what you're assuming when you make that statement, that I'm going to spend more time to get the first few questions right. Your probability to answer a question increases with the time spent on the question. We've actually done experiments on this as an organization. We are a research organization. We spend about 2,500 hours a month doing R&D. We actually did experiments on this one. What we found is, if you don't have the ability, your probability to answer a question doesn't increase tremendously as you spend more time on it. In fact, for a segment of population, you actually start to make mistakes. And a lot of you would have recognized that. I have 150 odd students in this webinar. So if you spend more time on a question, so if you have an ability, you solve a medium level question. If you have the corresponding ability, you mark the correct answer. But then you say, let me go revise that. Let me see if I'm absolutely certain. And half the time what starts to happen is, if you go revise it and spend extra time on that question, you end up marking the wrong answer, even though you had initially marked the correct one. Have you seen that happen to you? Okay, many of you have seen that many times, yes. Another experiment that I'll challenge that you do is, if you find a question that's really, really hard and you say, hey, instead of spending 2 minutes, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on that question. Try spending 5 minutes, 5 diligent minutes. Your probability of getting that question right, if you can't get it right in 2.5, 3 minutes, and if you spend 5 minutes on this, is not going to go up that much. So the key takeaway over here is that when you're learning, and this is the point that I want to emphasize over here, when you're learning, learn using the right method. Learn using a method that will help you logically get to that get to the answer. Don't focus on learning shortcuts, because shortcuts would not help you get there. And which is why it's really important to understand the difference between a non-adaptive test and an adaptive test, and how the study for a non-adaptive test differs, or how the study for an adaptive test such as the GMAT differs from that of a non-adaptive test. So how many of you have taken the GRE or the CAT, one of these two tests? How many of you have taken the CAT, which is an Indian equivalent of the GMAT, or the GRE? Or know about the CAT or the GRE. If you've not taken it, if you know about it, if you ever prepared for it, you probably know what I'll talk about. Okay, that's about 66% of you have either taken or know about how the GRE works or the CAT works. For those of you who don't know what the CAT is, it's a common entrance test. It's an Indian exam. I haven't taken the CAT, I would say, but I know how it works. So here is what happens, and CAT and the GRE, I put them in these buckets of what I call as non-adaptive tests. and GMAT is in this bucket of a computer adaptive test over here. So when you take the CAT, what really happens is you get a bunch of questions, and you have to choose which questions to answer. So you're given the choice as to which questions you want to answer, and when you get this bunch of questions, you have easy questions, medium difficulty questions, and hard questions. And the key to acing the CAT is to first choose the easy questions, answer them, then choose the medium difficulty questions, and if you find time, choose the hard questions to answer them. On a computer adaptive test, the questions are served to you by the question picker. So you don't have a choice as to which question you can answer, or you choose not to answer. You have to answer the question that is served to you. The only choice that you have is whether you spend time on it and answer, or you just randomly mark that question and move forward. Every question on a non-adaptive test has the same marks, so you get the same points for answering it. So the way to acing that test is to solve as many questions as possible, and to do that is to start with the easiest questions and then go on to the medium questions, and then in the end tackle the difficult questions. On a computer adaptive test, a difficult questions carries 3 times as much weight as an easy question does. Okay, as we saw, accuracy is not as relevant. Now, because selecting the right question and is key, and the key to acing the test is solving as many questions correctly as possible, a lot of people, when they look to ace a non-adaptive test, they focus on solving questions quickly. They focus on taking a ton of marks. Why? Because that's what you need to perfect to ace a non-adaptive test. A computer adaptive test, on the other hand, tests ability. The only reason you need to take up a mock is to sustain through a 3-hour test. For those of you who know of the GRE or the CAT, am I right? I mean, that's kind of how you study for these tests, right? You take a lot of mocks, you focus on identifying the easier questions first and solving them first, and solving them as quickly as possible. Those strategies don't work on the GMAT, because GMAT is not a test of your test taking strategy. It's a test of your ability. So you've got to learn how to solve difficult questions correctly if you want to ace the GMAT, if you want to get to that 740 score, if you want to get that scholarship or fellowship. Does this make the GMAT difficult? Actually, it makes the GMAT more enjoyable. Why? Because you can be very certain that if you have the ability, you won't be tricked by someone who can really identify easy questions. And which is why the GMAT is an excellent indicator of your success in B schools, whereas the CAT is not an indicator of your success in a business school. So the next question that it comes is, if GMAT's a test of ability, how the hell do I measure this in a consistent manner? Okay, so for eGMAT students, we built this tool called Scholarium, and which has close to 70 ability quizzes. In these ability quizzes, you take an ability quiz, you study for a section, you take an ability quiz in a pristine environment, you get an ability score. When you get an ability score, you can evaluate where you currently are. In fact, even before starting your preparation, you can take an ability quiz to figure out what your starting point is. It allows you to create precise, customized study plans. When you take an ability quiz, it also tells you the areas that you need to work on. So we have a lot of students who start our courses with a 700 and want to get to a 750. We ask them to take ability quizzes and then determine which areas do they need to focus on. So if you were someone who's starting at a fairly high ability level, I would say you don't even need to worry about subject verb or to a certain extent modifiers. I would say you focus your energy on parallelism and comparison. And this way, this guy can spend 4 days on sentence correction, go back, take another ability quiz, see how he or she has improved. Here's another example of a student who improved from 590 to 750 by focusing just on an analytics. Her goal, Carrie's goal was to aim for Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, but with a Q35, she couldn't even dream of these schools because they realized that she realized that they needed Q46 at a bare minimum. She started a V36, so she was reasonably strong. She was at an 80 percentile over there, but she realized to get to that 750 score, she needed to improve her verbal further. She started using eGMAT, Quant, and Scholarinium because Quant was a major area for improvement. She finished the course and improved from Q35 to Q47 just by using the course. And then she used Scholarinium to get to a Q50. It's because of this precision targeting and the quality of questions and solutions that Scholarinium is rated higher than pretty much every other analytics or testing engine on GMAT Club. You rarely see GMAT prep mocks over here. You rarely see GMAT Club tests, and you can see the rating for Scholarinium as well. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about strategy in the context of GMAT. We've talked about GMAT Planner. We briefly talked about GMAT Planner and how you can use that to create your own quant and verbal scores and your target abilities. We've talked about why GMAT's important to get to your top B schools. We've talked about the relationship between GMAT and ability, which is where we spent a good bunch of time. What is still to come? How should you study to get those core skills so that you get to that 740 score? How do you prevent a score plateau? And then how do you track your improvement while you're studying? Okay. So with that, let's talk about core skills and why do you need to ace them to score high on the GMAT? And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quant question. I'm going to have you solve this quant question. Here is the question. It's a word problems question. Here are the answer choices. I'm going to give you close to 2 minutes to answer this. All right, guys, last 50 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, excuse me, and broadcast the results. 56% of you chose choice B, which is the correct answer. And I have the next question, which is how do you solve this question? By making equations, by number substitution, or by using a formula? Three, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. So what you really see is 97% more or less of you who solved this question solved using either by making equations or by number substitutions. Both these approaches require you to have a certain method. For those of you who basically used the method of making equations to solve this question, there's a certain method, there's a certain process that you follow when you make equations. Those of you who use number substitution, also there is a process. There's something that you do in step 1, something that you do in step 2, something that you do in step 3. And to be able to answer this question correctly, you need to follow that process. Only 2 of you used a formula to solve this question. First of all, am I correct? When you use number substitution or make equations, there's a certain method that you go about doing this. And that method has a certain logic to it. In the same way, when you're when you're trying to solve verbal questions, you need to have a certain method, a logical method towards solving those questions. You can't use a formulaic approach because more often than not, the formulaic approach will not work. The shortcuts will not work. You need to have a similar methodical way to approaching verbal questions. Here is the solution to the prior question. You can really see that. Now, let's talk about another piece, which is the core skills. What are the core skills required to solve such a question? What are some core areas, some core things that you need to be able to do correctly to solve this? Okay, basic algebra. What else? Correct understanding of the language, logic. Okay, calculation skills, alertness, linear equations. All right. So essentially, when you think about the core skills that are required, here are the 4 skills that are required, and you guys kind of know these skills that they're required. You need to be able to work with variables. You need to be able to convert statements into equations, which means when you see Jacob is not 12 years younger than Michelle, you should be able to do J plus 12 is equal to M, or M is equal to J plus 12. You need to be able to relate them and then solve these equations. Does everyone see this? These are kind of the 4 skills that you need to know. Now, tell me one thing what would happen if the core skill that you lacked in was skill number 2, which is converting statement into equations, and the skill that you practiced again and again is skill number 4, which is solving equations. What would happen? If the skill that you lacked in was skill number 2, but the skill that you focused on practicing was skill number 4, you would select the wrong answer. Why? Because you would solve the wrong equation. You'd solve it correctly, but it will be the wrong equation to begin with. There are some of you who really said that, hey, I've been preparing for some time, but it seems that I am stuck at a certain score. If you are one of those individuals, select yes. If you've been preparing for some time, but it seems that, hey, your score doesn't seem to improve even though you're putting in the time, I want those people to select yes. There are about 70 odd percent, 75% of you who are in that boat. And for those of you who've spent 70 hours preparing for the GMAT, a good number of you will get to that boat. So you need to put in about 70 hours to get there. The reason why this happens is because you're doing essentially the same thing. You're not focusing on the right core skill which you're missing, and I'm going to demonstrate that through an example on verbal. But essentially, can you really see that your score will not budge if you focus on the wrong core skill? Can you see that? We call this situation a score plateau, which is you hit a certain score, you keep on spending time, yet your score doesn't improve. Can you see that? It happens in verbal, it happens in quant. I'm going to demonstrate. We have a quant webinar tomorrow. I'm going to demonstrate that in quant tomorrow. All right, now solve for the wrong variable or solve the wrong equation. By the way, when it comes to verbal, a lot of the core skills that you need are taught in schools to Americans or even to Britishers or to Canadians. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I have a daughter who is 11 years old. A few years ago, when she was 6, I was looking for a school for her. And nice thing about schools over here is they teach you or they allow you to tour various classrooms. So this is I toured the third grader classroom, and this is what I saw over here. This is what they were learning. And forgive the quality of the picture because this is a 2013 camera. So they were third graders were learning compare and contrast, how to figure out author's purpose, cause and effect reasoning, how to differentiate between facts and opinions, how to make inferences, how to get to the main idea and how to get to the details. How do you draw conclusions? The strategies that they were using were by making connections, by doing predictive reading, by summarizing, by asking leading questions, by visualizing what they had learned. I mean, the level of clarity that they had with regards to these core skills was such that I mean, right now my daughter is in 6th grade. She can do half of GMAT reading comprehension. I'm a 6th grader. Not because we have taught her anything, we actually don't have time to teach her, but not just her. Most kids in her class can do half of GMAT RC today. That is what they learn in schools. How many of you did that in school? Doing predictive reading, learning to infer things. Okay. Yeah, we used to read and look for answers too, not do all of those things. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to solve a verbal question. Why? Because we want to know about core skills. We want to know which core skills does verbal test, and to do that, whether such neatly defined core skills exist on GMAT verbal or not. And to do that, I'm going to make you solve a bold-faced question. And I'm going to give you 4 minutes to solve this question. So don't worry about timing. Select the answer that you think is the best that talks about the roles played by these bolded statements. So 4 minutes, ample time. Go approach this question fairly slowly. All right, guys, one more minute. Okay, last 15 seconds. Get those responses in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Broadcast the results. So what we really see is choices C and D very popular, choice A and E somewhat popular, and B being the least popular choice. Now before I go into explaining this, I'm going to explain this question in detail because we want to understand the core skills. I want to make sure that I emphasize this point enough. My goal for the next 15 minutes, which is when I explain this question, is not to teach you how to ace boldface. My goal is to expose the core skills that this question tests. I can't teach you boldface in 15 minutes. It takes us about 4.5 to 5 hours to teach you boldface. So that's something that I want to make sure that you understand that. Now with that, I want to understand how did you solve this question? And by the way, if you have no idea how to solve this question, or if you have doubts about how to approach a question such as this one, I would recommend you take a look at the boldface concept and application files in our free trial. So the question, how did you solve this question? Okay, let's get a few more responses. Three, 2, and 1. All right, I'll let you read what others said, but essentially first read the full statement, read thoroughly and understood the structure. Those are good. Read, comprehend, make a connection between the two portions. Really, really good. Pre-think, understood the whole paragraph. A lot of good approaches. So I'll show you how we approach the question such as this one. When we do this, we first read the entire argument, and then we in the argument we read sentence by sentence and classify the statements as facts or claims. Now, sometimes what you're going to really see is you're going to see a complex statement which has both a fact and claim embedded. So we really differentiate between them. So essentially, we go clause by clause, and whether it's a dependent clause or an independent clause. And then we create what we call as a structure of passage. And when we do that, we say, what does each statement do with regards to the main conclusion? We do pre-thinking for the bolded statements, and then we do an option statement analysis. Okay, so let's go about doing this. Stock prices of companies that exceed 100 billion in revenue rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. When you look at what this statement is it's a data point, it's a fact. The author is telling you that this happens. There are these companies called extremely large caps, and their stock prices rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So this is nothing but an observation or a fact. Remember, a fact is something which you don't question in the context of the argument. Then the author says, it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now, this isn't the, so what is this? When you look at this entire statement, and this will be a learning for many of you, when you look at this entire statement, it's a fact. But when you look at the bolded portion or the underlined portion over here, that is a claim or a belief. That belief is written by the author so that to explain this data point, which we call as fact A. What is fact A? Fact A is this data point, and the belief is there to explain fact A. Now, many of you may be wondering, how come the overall statement is a fact when it has a claim or a belief embedded in it? How many of you are wondering that? All right. So let's kind of look at why that is the case. And that's something that, it's not tested in this question, but because this is a 650 level question, but as the questions become harder, you would see this tested. So what is a fact? A fact is something which you don't question in the context of the argument. A fact is something which in the context of the argument is taken as universal truth. A claim or an opinion is something, or a prediction. All of these are in the same bucket. We call them the opinion or the claim bucket. Is something that someone thinks. It's 15 degrees outside, usually is a fact. And when you say it's cold outside, it's an opinion. It's opinion of a person. It's what that person thinks. A Finnish guy or a Russian guy and a South Indian may have different opinions of what is cold. And again, as an example, when you see if the author in an argument tells you, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard, and you were asked to evaluate this entire statement, what would you call this? You would call this a fact. Why? Because you're not going to dispute the portion that hey, according to Business Week, Wharton is not better than Harvard. You're not going to dispute Business Week, whether Business Week said this or not. What you may dispute is whether Wharton is truly better than Harvard. Did you understand this? What you're not going to dispute is whether when the author in a CR argument tells you, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard, you're not going to dispute this according to Business Week part. What you will dispute is, or what you should dispute, or what you can dispute is whether Wharton is truly better than Harvard or not, which is what makes this a claim. But this entire statement, which includes according to Business Week, is a fact. So similarly, when you see this statement, you ask, can I dispute it as commonly thought? No, you can't, which makes this entire thing a fact and the underlined portion a claim or a belief. Then the author realizes a statement with however. However means a contrasting term, which means two things going in opposite direction. However, which means that we are now going to talk about something which goes against the first two statements. Studies show that ELCs that provide higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. So what do we get? We get two data points over here. One is author mentions that exceptions to statement 1 exist, which means there is this group of ELCs that provide that beat the market. And then there's a characteristic of that group of ELCs, which is a majority of them are run by their founders. And then the author says, since most of them are run by professional management, which is that is inherently risk averse. Another data point about ELCs. The study's findings strongly suggest that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not because they're too big to grow, but rather that they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. What is this? It is the main claim that the author is trying to make. This is the truth that he believes about ELCs, and he believes that, hey, every ELC can grow, but the reason that they don't grow is because they're under professional management that is too risk averse. Okay. So When you think about the structure of the argument, you have the last statement as the author's conclusion. You have the statement before that, which is a data point that supports the author's conclusion, which makes the author's conclusion more believable. You have statement number 3, which again gives you data points that support the author's conclusion. This statement also includes the bolded statement. And then the first two are the first sets a context, which is the context about ELCs, and the second is a fact which has a belief. Now this belief is challenged by the main conclusion. Too big to grow is challenged by the main conclusion. So what is boldface 1? Boldface 1 is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It is a data point or a fact which is provided to make you believe in the author's conclusion or support the author's conclusion. Boldface 2 is the reason for the observed trend. It's also the alternate explanation that the author favors for the observation regarding ELC. It's what the author believes in. Do those pre-thinking, do they make sense? All right. So let's now look at boldface 1. Okay. Boldface 1 is a characteristic. A majority of them are run by their founders. It's a characteristic of the companies that beat the market. Okay. It is a data point which supports the author's conclusion. That's boldface 1. Chelsea, does that help? Okay, so let's now look at which choice is the correct answer choice. I'm going to start with choice A. Okay, choice A says the first, remember the first is the majority of them are run by their founders, is a claim. Is the first a claim? Or is it a fact? It's a fact. And then it goes on to relish the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument. Fact or evidence, yes. The accuracy, do we doubt the accuracy of first? Do we doubt its accuracy? No, we don't doubt that at all. Because these two parts are wrong, I won't even go further in evaluating choice A. I would say choice A cannot be the correct answer. Now let's go to E for elephant. E says the first provides evidence, and evidence is okay. That part is okay. That refutes something. Let's see, what does it refute? It refutes an explanation that the argument favors. Now there's another term for the explanation that an explanation that the argument favors. That is a conclusion. Now my question to you is, does the first refute or go against the conclusion? A majority of them are run by their founders. Does it go against the main conclusion? No, it doesn't. So I say this cannot be my correct answer. And hence, I reject that as well. Now let's look at choice D, D for delta. The first is evidence, that has been used to support what? An explanation that the argument challenges. So my evidence is correct. Now it can support something. So that part is I would put a star on something. Now which explanation does the argument challenge, guys? Which explanation does the argument challenge? Which explanation? Common thought, growth rate, yes. Right? ELCs are too big to grow. So my question is, does the first support too big to grow? Does the first support too big to grow? No, it does not. It actually goes against that. It provides evidence that ELCs can grow faster. So it can't support too big to grow. It actually goes against that, right? So I say, okay, this support is wrong, which means choice D also has to be wrong. Now choice C, which is my correct answer, let's look at this. It says the first is an evidence. What kind of evidence? That has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. What is another term for an explanation that the argument favors? It is my conclusion. So the first definitely supports the conclusion, and the second is that explanation, which is the second is the main conclusion. Because all parts of choice C are correct, choice C is indeed the correct answer. Which is what the biggest group over here thought. 40% of you got choice C. So Nakshi says, for how long should it typically take to answer a question like this on the GMAT? So Nakshi, you have data from your attempt over here. I gave you guys 4 minutes. Now, what I was capturing data over here in the answer choices. People who answered it correctly, 80% of it answered it in less than 2.5 minutes. So you follow this process and you're able to do that in 2.5 minutes or less as you get better. Okay, so for those of you worried about it, there's data in front of you where people are doing this in that amount of time using this method. And again, we won't be GMAT Club's most successful company if this method took that long. Okay, so remember, the reason why we did this question was to really tell you what are the core skills tested on the verbal side of the GMAT. So let's kind of look at that over here. What are the core skills tested? As you look at the answer choices, your ability to classify a statement, your ability to relate the statement to the conclusion or the main point of the argument. Relate both of them, whether these statements support or go against each other. And then, as you saw, the answer choices weren't just, they were convoluted statements. And essentially the ability to go word by word while evaluating the answer choices and really evaluating whether those words are correct or incorrect. Okay. If you're an eGMAT student, there are many places where you're going to learn this. The first thing is you're going to learn this in the Bookbased concept files, which are a part of the free trial, and the foundation files in the CR course. The second core skill where you figure out whether a statement supports or refutes a conclusion, strengthen and weaken files. Again, you do get a lot of practice in our Scholaranium files as well. When it comes to evaluating the answer choices, the Bookbased practice files, the Bookbased application files are official solutions, and the 40-odd questions in Scholaranium that you're going to find. Okay. Now, let's see how do these answer choices play on these core skills. Here is choice A, and the portions in red are the portions that are incorrect. And what you really see is the first is a claim placed on your ability to classify a statement. The accuracy of which is at issue in the argument plays on the logical structure of the argument. Similarly, the first is an objection, which is choice B, plays on the ability to classify a statement. And the second portion also plays on the logical structure, whether you're able to understand the logic that the author is using. Choice D, which was a closed choice, plays on the logical structure of the argument, which is really, really important, and linking both the bolded statements. And choice E, again, plays on the logical structure of the argument. You can really see how, if you develop these core skills, first of all, for those of you who are solving bold-faced questions, did you have this view of core skills when you were studying for bold-faced questions? Did you understand you had to ace these core skills? Not very many. I see a couple of yeses overall. But now, can you really see that if you target and improve on these core skills, your ability in boldface is going to improve? Can you see that? If you improve on this core skills, if you're able to figure out how to classify a statement, if you understand the logical structure and figure out which statements support which other statements are not, you'll be able to answer these questions a lot more clearly. This is a lot more like Quant, and which is what we focus on when we teach in our courses. Now, for those of you who've started using books, you won't have seen these core skills listed over there. Again, you may have seen, okay, what is a fact versus what is a claim, but how do you classify statements in a step-by-step manner? You won't see that over there. How do you come up with a logical structure? You won't see a whole lot of that over there. But it's when you build these core skills, that's when you go and get those 760 scores. So when it comes to acing the GMAT, you first need to really create a plan and make sure that you budget enough time for it. If you don't have enough time, you make time. The way you make time is make sure you get time from your personal or professional life and take a few vacation days. Create milestones that you want to hit. And if you need help in creating milestones, write to us at rajat@e-GMAT or support at e-GMAT. As you create those milestones, define where you're going to put in how much effort. A lot of people think they're going to do practice from the official guide and they're going to ace the GMAT. OG is a practice resource. It's not a learning resource. It won't help you build your core skills. And then measure your ability frequently. Every 30 to 40 hours is what I typically recommend, which is for most people, it's every 2 weeks or sooner. And use data to figure out the areas that you still need to focus on. And when you're doing this, make sure you're focusing on something where you actually need help improving. So this last part, very briefly, tells you how we make you do all of this. One thing that I want to make sure is that you remember GMAT testability. That's the only thing that matters. Your accuracy, everything else is essentially secondary. So how do you get a good score on the test? It's actually fairly simple. If you think about and you break down that score out of 800, that score out of 800 is divided into your quant and verbal scores. Those quant and verbal scores are further divided into what we call as subsections. Your verbal has 3 subsections, your quant has 5 subsections. So essentially, if you hit the ability scores here, here, and here, if you have milestones for these, and if you hit those milestones, you'll hit this milestone and hit this milestone, which means you'll hit this milestone. It's as scientific as that. So acing the GMAT isn't rocket science. It's actually very predictable and very measurable. So you can measure your progress and you can predict your result. If you measure this improvement, you can almost predict your end score. And we measure this improvement, and which is why, this is the kind of improvement that an average e-GMAT achieves. Now, the reason why the improvement is lower on quant is because a lot of the students who join us are already at a Q43, Q44, and they don't have that much headroom to improve beyond 50 points. We track this, we guarantee this, and we give you these tools to measure. When you look at other prep companies, not one of them tracks this or guarantees this. They may give you a 10-point improvement, but not a 70-point improvement. Okay. And the reason why they can't do this is because their architecture isn't designed to do this. And when you think about a traditional test prep, this is how it's designed. When you join a traditional test prep, you get a bunch of books where you learn concepts from. So you read a bunch of books, read a bunch of lessons, then you come and attend a live session. Live session is where you learn a lot of application. Now, how well you learn application depends on 2 things. One is how many good quality teachers there are, which by the way, there are very few. And the second is, do those teachers need to know how to use the tools to evaluate and get data from you? There are very few good quality teachers, and many of them don't know how to use tools to extract information from students. Once you attend a bunch of classrooms, you go and take mocks. When you do that, that's the first moment of truth that you get. And this onus of analysis is completely with the student. For those of you who've gone through the traditional test prep route, have you witnessed this? Have you seen something like this happen? All right, many of you have seen that. When we started eGMAT about 8 years ago, we wanted to do something different. Okay, we wanted to make sure that we help you track your improvement. Now, we won't do personal interaction with you just because it's not possible to sell a $300 course and do that, but we give you tools to track your improvement, and we do that at 3 different levels. But before that, when you think about how is this architecture aligned with that of the GMAT, there's only alignment at this mock test level. Okay, and because this alignment only is there at that mock test level, this many people who go through this architecture end up going through it multiple times. They get frustrated, and a good number of them give up on their dreams course. They just feel they can't do it. So when you think about how is eGMAT organized and in the context of all of this, what we have is what we call as these evaluated learning nuggets, where we teach you concepts, we teach you application, and we have qualifying exercises right then and there. And we give you feedback at concept level, at application level, and at the entire module level. Here's an example of, again, we talked about the subject verbs module. Here's another example of the subject verbs module. What you rarely see is conceptual learning with feedback over here. What you see is application as well, and practice right then and there. So we help you master each and every concept. We evaluate your ability to apply those concepts and give you feedback. That is how you get that personalized feedback. So when you think about how is it aligned with the structure of GMAT, it's not just aligned at the SC level, it's also aligned at the level of modifiers, subject verb, parallelism, comparison, and you get these scores in each one of these modules. If you ace these modules, there's no reason why you won't ace sentence correction. And if you ace sentence correction, critical reasoning, and so on and so forth, there's no reason why you would not ace the GMAT. The key thing which is there is you don't get to 90 percentile just by studying, but you need to perfect your understanding. Here's an example of another student who moved from 40 percentile in SC to 90 plus percentile. Ria scored 760 on the GMAT. She got into ISB within 10 days of applying. So how do you focus on this perfection? You first set the right milestones. You then get the insights about where you need to focus, and then you personalize your learning. And if you need help, if you are an eGMAT student who needs help in setting these milestones, write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. We will send you a link to the PSP tool that we've just that we were on the verge of releasing to help you create these personalized milestones. So how do you achieve perfection? First of all, use the right process to answer questions. And that process is outlined in the application files. That feedback is given to you in the concept files. The data about perfection is there in practice files. Then use that feedback to improve. And where do you get the feedback? Video lessons, practice quizzes, and ability quizzes. You get that feedback 25 minutes every 5 hours, and ability quizzes as you take them. Typically, the first ability quizzes or second ability quiz is taken after 30 hours of effort, and then you take an ability quiz every 2 to 3 hours of effort. And then the personalization is through our tools such as GMAT Planner, the PSP tool that we are about to release, our custom quiz engine, and the skill data in Scholarium, where we tell you, hey, you're weak in subject verb, or you're weak in verbs, or you're weak in pronouns, but you're strong in modifiers, etc., etc. Here's the verbs module to really just show this in action. When you see this is the verbs module. First of all, you'll see this is incredibly detailed. But what you see over here in this module is that the insights that you get over here. You learn the concepts, you get data over here as to how well you're learning those concepts. Then you do level 1 application. Then you learn the advanced concepts, you get data on that as well. And then you do level 2 application. Okay. Now the beauty of this is that as you go over here, and you can really see in the final practice quiz, if you want to figure out what's causing this low score, you look at the data in a snap, you can figure out that, hey, this is where you didn't do well, this is where you didn't do well, and this is where you didn't do well. So if you revise this, take another practice quiz, you'll see those scores improve. Just by using this data, you can go from that 60 percentile ability in verbs to 90 percentile in 1 hour. Tell me another system, even a private tutor, who can do this. The key is your course is effective not because we make these impactful video lessons, but because it gives you insights on areas where you can improve upon. Okay, the video lessons are amazing, the application files are amazing, but this personalization is what makes it even more impactful and helps you get to that 90 percentile. With that, just a brief summary. Overall, create milestones to ace the GMAT, build ability, and towards your journey, personalize your learning. And the way you personalize your learning is by constantly evaluating yourself, looking at data. Okay. And again, if you're an eGMAT student and want to get an early, want to test out the PSP tool, write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. We can help you define your GMAT strategy. We can help you create your personalized milestones. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. It was a pleasure conducting this webinar. You guys have been an amazing audience. You participated really well. Also, if you'd like to give some feedback on the webinar, that would be really helpful. Also, the session files are here. You can download the session files. Actually, hold on, this is the wrong file. Let me get the session files. I'm sorry, guys, I don't have it uploaded for some reason, which is all right. Here's the session file. Anand says I've started studying eGMAT from 27 Jan. I've finished on 90% of SC, but I'm tired of now studying SC for a continuous 17 to 18 days. Can I study Quant on alternate days to relieve the boredomness? So Anand, great question. A lot of people face this. This is what we call as mental fatigue. So there are three things that I would recommend. First of all, since you're done with 90% of the course, take ability quizzes. Number two, you need to not learn new things for a day but revise or take a day's break. If you study for 19 days continuously, this can happen. Take a day's break. But I would not recommend you go on to Quant without hitting a 70 to 80 percentile on SC. So take an ability quiz. If you hit 70 to 80 percentile, you can go on to Quant or you can go on to critical reasoning, but not otherwise. If you need to take a day's break, take a day's break. That's okay. Okay, but then come back. And the reason why I say that is because if you spend 2 to 3 more days, you'll be able to hit that 70 to 80% ability. Right now, you'd be that much more confident. It will save you a lot more time and give you a lot more confidence later on. Can you get into HEC Paris if you have a very high GMAT score but no extracurriculars? Yes, I've seen people get into there if you have a good application, good GMAT score. Yes. You don't need extracurriculars. Extracurriculars add a dimension to your personality, but if you can communicate that dimension otherwise, you'd still be able to do really, really well. Do top schools have the same criteria for full-time versus part-time MBAs? I have not seen part-time MBAs get scholarships. Again, part-time MBAs are the profit centers for most B schools. So yeah, part-time MBAs are supposed to be for people who want to stay in the same career stream, but are doing an MBA to go ahead in their career. So yes, part-time MBAs scholarships are not very, very, very infrequent, if any. Full-time MBAs, you're going to see a lot of scholarships. Okay, guys, open-ended question is not for Q pod is not for questions. I'll take some of the questions that I see over here, but the Q&A pod is for question. If you bought the eGMAT package, my target is 770, but in OG quizzes I fall below 40%. Will you be able to get to your target? No, you won't be. Again, the reason you're falling to 40% is because you're not doing the files early on. The data early on will be showing, exposing gaps. Fix those gaps. Follow the process. You will do well on the OG quizzes. 600 to 720, is it possible in a month? If you can spend about 120 hours, yes, you can. It's about 120 hours. How competitive, Raja says, is the male Indian finance pool? I would say it's you compete with the finance pool worldwide, and the question really is to what extent the kind of value that you bring in, and to what kind of schools does this value compare where they want a male Indian guy in the finance side of things. So while it's not as competitive as the IT pool, it's still competitive than if you were an American who were applying to a certain school. So I would say if I were to rate competitiveness on a scale, if and if the male Indian IT pool is at a 95 percentile competitiveness, you are probably still at an 85, and the other finance guys who are from other countries are probably at a 75. What is the difference between live and online courses? Our live courses give you instructor-led sessions and which are not a part of our online courses, which means that if you have you learn from a live instructor, they can really figure out okay where you're going wrong in your thought process and give you feedback that is personalized to you. Our online courses very comprehensive, probably 3 to 4 times as comprehensive as the best books out there. They give you these personalized insights, but you don't get to interact with a live person. You still get all your doubts resolved, but not with a live person. Our live courses also come with score improvement guarantees. When you take an ability quiz, when you finish a certain course or you're 80% done with an SCCR, number properties, algebra course, you take an ability quiz to evaluate yourself. If you go into your study plan course, it actually details out how do you go about doing that. Does WorkX matter? A lot in MBAs, NMIM, somewhat. How important is the GMAT score for INSEAD? Fairly important. Kavita says, I already have a score of 640. Right now, I'm stuck at 670 with a Q48 and a V3435. Should I concentrate to get 51 on quant or more on verbal? Kavita, it depends on what your end score is. If your end score is 700, I would say if you're already at a Q48, aim for a Q50. 51's difficult. 50 is very possible. And then if you need to improve verbal, you then focus on improving verbal. How much time does it take to complete all verbal and eGMAT in the live package in terms of hours? Um, so if you look at covering all the content, it's about 200 to 250 hours. But most people, because you're not, what you're trying to do is get to a certain score. Your goal is not to learn the content because you already know certain content. Uh, so so um, so most people spend about 170 hours. But if you are someone who's starting at a let's say a 500, you would need to spend about 250 to 270 hours to get to a 700, 750 score, 700 to 720 score. In the GMAT exam, how do you identify which topic a question falls under or concept? Some questions can be very tricky. If you've prepared well, you would know. That's what I would say. In certain questions, in quant especially, they'll combine concepts, and you'd see some of that happening tomorrow in the algebra session. But on the verbal side of things, it's 90+% of the time it's pretty clear cut. 710 to 760, about 60 to 80 hours is what I would say. Arun, if you're an eGMAT student, ask for the PSP tool. You can write to rajat@eGMAT.com. It will give you very precise estimates as to where you should focus on, what milestones should you achieve, and how much time should you focus on each aspect. So you can write to rajat@e-gmat.com. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. It was a pleasure conducting this webinar today. If you have any questions, you can write them, send them to rajat@e-gmat. Also, we have the algebra webinar tomorrow. Do attend it. It'll tell you where you make mistakes in algebra, especially in inequalities in algebra. All right. Good luck. Study well. Take a look at the free trial. There's some amazing video lessons over there that you could benefit from right away. And I will see you tomorrow or later on the eGMAT platform. What are the times for live classes? All live classes happen at the time of this particular webinar, which is 7 a.m. Pacific, 8:30 p.m. IST, and all live classes only take place on the weekends.